The rain fell on Fifth Avenue with a cold, indifferent persistence, turning the city lights into a blurry watercolor of wealth and power. From the leather-upholstered silence of his chauffeured town car, Dr. Arthur Caldwell watched the world slide by. At 62, he was the dean of a prestigious medical school, a man encased in a designer suit and a reputation as solid as the skyscrapers that clawed at the night sky. Yet, a profound weariness had settled deep in his bones, a cynicism that dulled the once bright passion he held for medicine. He saw executives scurry under expensive umbrellas, their faces set with purpose, while in the shadows of awnings, the city's forgotten souls huddled for meager shelter. The symphony of traffic and distant sirens was the only soundtrack to this stark division, a constant reminder of the isolation that thrived in the heart of the metropolis. His car slowed at a red light, and his gaze fell upon a scene unfolding near a large dumpster. University maintenance workers were clearing out old materials from a library renovation, tossing items with practiced disinterest. Amidst the refuse, a man named Samuel Miller, whose face was a roadmap of hardship, was desperately trying to salvage a small stack of thick, aging books. One of the workers snatched at them, embarking that they were useless junk. In the ensuing struggle, a heavy volume slipped from Sam's grasp, landing with a soft thud on the wet pavement, its pages splayed open. From inside the warmth of his car, Arthur felt a jolt. He recognized the cover instantly, even through the rain-streaked window. It was an old edition of Guyton and Hall's textbook of medical physiology, the very book that had been his Bible, his entry into a world of healing. The sight of that sacred book, the vessel of his youthful dreams, being treated like garbage, sent a fissure through the hardened shell of Arthur's apathy. He wasn't just seeing a book, he was seeing a symbol of the man he used to be, an idealistic young student who believed medicine could change the world, one life at a time. The image of this destitute stranger, this invisible man, fighting to rescue a piece of knowledge that the world had discarded, was a profound and unexpected indictment of his own comfortable detachment. He remembered the thrill of discovery within those pages, the long nights spent memorizing pathways and functions. Before his driver could even ask, Arthur pushed open the heavy car door, the cold rain a sudden shock against his skin. An impulse, the first genuine one he'd felt in years, had taken control. He walked directly toward the two men, his expensive shoes splashing in the puddles. The maintenance worker backed away, intimidated by the sudden appearance of the dean. Arthur ignored him, his eyes fixed on Sam, who clutched the remaining books to his chest like a shield. Arthur didn't offer money or pity. He simply pointed to the fallen textbook and asked a question that hung in the damp air. "Do you know what's in those pages?" Sam, looking up with eyes that held a surprising clarity, responded without hesitation. Quoting a fundamental principle of glomerular filtration he had just read, the words, spoken with a quiet confidence, struck Arthur with the force of a physical blow, disarming him completely. It's in moments like these, when one soul truly sees another, that you realize how many stories deserve to be heard. Subscribing to this channel is what allows us to keep finding and sharing them. Inside the quiet warmth of a 24-hour diner, the air thick with the smell of coffee and frying bacon, an invisible line was drawn between the two men. Arthur sat in his tailored suit, a man who fit anywhere, while Sam hunched over his cup, his worn jacket seeming to absorb the light around him, making him smaller. The silence wasn't awkward, but heavy with unspoken questions. Arthur broke it, his voice softer than it had been on the street. He didn't ask about homelessness or hardship. He asked about the man Sam was before all of this. He simply asked Sam to tell him his story. For the first time in a long time, someone was looking at Sam and not seeing a problem to be solved or a nuisance to be ignored, but a person with a history, a past that existed beyond the cold pavement. Sam spoke in a low, even tone, his eyes fixed on the swirling steam from his coffee. He had been a civil engineer once, a man who designed bridges, who understood stress points and load-bearing structures. He had a wife, a daughter, a life built on precision and predictability. Then came the accident, a single moment of distraction on a rain-slicked road that took his family from him. He didn't speak of it with drama, but with the hollowed-out finality of a man who had replayed the scene 1,000,000 times. The grief became a chasm, swallowing his career, his home, and finally, his will to be a part of a world that had moved on without him. The streets weren't a choice, he explained, but the last stop after everything else had crumbled away into nothing. His discovery of the medical textbooks in a dumpster had been a lifeline. In a world that felt random and cruel, the human body was a system of breathtaking logic. He spoke of the Krebs cycle and the elegant cascade of the nervous system with a reverence Arthur hadn't heard in his lecture halls for decades. For Sam, physiology wasn't an academic subject. It was a beautiful, intricate machine where every part had a purpose, a stark contrast to his own life, which felt so purposeless. Reading those discarded pages under the dim glow of a street lamp was the only time he felt a sense of order, a connection to something that made sense. It was an intellectual sanctuary, a way to feed his mind when his body was starving for so much more. As Arthur listened, the weary dean of medicine began to fade, and the young, idealistic student he once was stirred from a long slumber. He saw in Sam's hungry intellect the same fire that had driven him through sleepless nights, poring over those very same textbooks. The cynicism that had become his armor for so many years felt thin and useless. He was looking at a brilliant mind, a mind that society had deemed as disposable as the books it had thrown away. In that moment, a decision formed, not out of pity, but out of a profound, almost selfish need. To reignite the spark in Sam's eyes felt like the only way to find a flicker of his own long-extinguished flame. He realized he wasn't just offering help. He was seeking his own form of redemption. He leaned forward, his voice firm but gentle. "The library at the university has every book you could ever want to read," he began, laying out an offer that hung in the air, seeming both impossible and miraculous. He proposed full access, a quiet corner to study, and his personal mentorship to navigate the labyrinth of prerequisites and exams needed for medical school. He wasn't offering a handout, he was offering a path, a brutally difficult one, but a path nonetheless. Sam stared at him, his expression a storm of disbelief, suspicion, and a fragile, terrifying hope. He had long ago stopped believing in second chances, and here was a man offering him the most improbable one imaginable. After a long silence, he gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. The first days on campus were a harsh immersion into a world that was not built for him. Sam, in his clean but still worn clothes, was an apparition from another reality walking through the hallowed, marble-floored halls. Students in expensive sweaters would fall silent as he passed, their whispers following him like a cold draught. He could feel their gazes on his back in the library, a mixture of pity, curiosity, and a thinly veiled disdain. He was a social experiment, a curiosity the dean had brought in from the wild. Every condescending smile and averted glance was a reminder that he didn't belong, that he was an intruder in their pristine world of privilege and ambition, a ghost haunting their ivory tower. Arthur, meanwhile, was fighting his own battles in the polished mahogany boardrooms. The university's board of trustees was apoplectic. The chairman, a man whose veins seemed to run with ice water, spoke of brand integrity and unacceptable risks to our donor base. They saw Sam not as a prospective student, but as a liability, a walking, breathing public relations disaster. Arthur stood his ground, his arguments about human potential and moral duty falling on deaf ears. He left the meeting feeling the immense, crushing weight of the institution he led, an institution that seemed more concerned with its image than with the pursuit of knowledge and the betterment of humanity. He was more isolated in his position than ever before. For Sam, the academic challenge was a mountain steeper than he could have imagined. His self-taught knowledge of physiology was a solid foundation, but it was no match for the brutal, unforgiving language of organic chemistry and advanced biology. He spent 18-hour days in a small carrel in the library, surrounded by stacks of books, the formulas and molecular structures blurring before his exhausted eyes. He was decades older than the other students, his mind less pliable, the habits of rigorous academic study long lost. There were moments of profound despair when he would stare at a page for an hour and the words would simply refuse to cohere into meaning, making him question if this entire endeavor was a cruel joke. Arthur's own demons began to resurface with a vengeance. The pressure of Sam's struggle triggered memories he had long suppressed. The face of a young girl on an operating table, a routine procedure gone horribly wrong. He remembered the sickening silence of the heart monitor, the weight of the surgical instruments in his suddenly clumsy hands, and the hollow look in the parents' eyes afterward. That failure had been the start of his long, slow retreat from the core of medicine, the beginning of his cynical detachment. He was terrified that he was doing it again, that his hubris would lead Sam to a different kind of failure, another life he was responsible for breaking. The fear of failing Sam was inextricably linked to the trauma of his past. The breaking point came during a preparatory class led by a notoriously arrogant professor. Knowing Sam was the dean's special project, the professor seemed to take a cruel pleasure in targeting him. He asked Sam a complex question about enzymatic kinetics, and when Sam hesitated, the professor smirked. Perhaps some concepts are a bit too abstract when you're used to more concrete problems, he said, the insinuation hanging poisonously in the air. A few students snickered. The public humiliation was a physical blow, stripping away the fragile confidence Sam had managed to build. It's gut-wrenching to watch someone's spirit get crushed like that, and it's why we have to keep telling these stories. Your subscription is what gives a voice to the forgotten. After that day, something inside Sam shut down, the light in his eyes. The intense curiosity that had so captivated Arthur began to dim. He started showing up to the library later and leaving earlier, avoiding the crowded study halls. He stopped asking questions in his sessions with Arthur, offering only monosyllabic answers. He was building a wall around himself, brick by painful brick, convinced that the professor was right, that he was an imposter who would never truly belong. The shame of that moment in the classroom had branded him, reinforcing his deepest fear, that he was, and always would be, the man from the gutter, no matter how many books he read. Arthur saw the withdrawal and felt a rising panic. He knew the signs of a person giving up, not with a bang, but with a slow, quiet fade. He would call the small apartment he had arranged for Sam, and the calls would go to voicemail. His texts were met with short, evasive replies. The easy camaraderie they had found in the late-night study sessions was replaced by a tense, unspoken distance. Arthur feared he had pushed too hard, that he had taken this man from the relative simplicity of his struggle on the streets and thrown him into a sophisticated new kind of hell. The partnership that had begun with such hope in a late-night diner was now fracturing under the immense pressure of their colliding worlds. Arthur's panic began as a low thrum and escalated into a deafening roar. He found the small apartment meticulously clean, the bed made, and the borrowed clothes folded neatly on a chair. On the simple wooden table, the medical textbooks were stacked in a perfect silent tower, a monument to a surrendered dream. It was a formal, heartbreaking farewell. Sam was gone. For 3 days, Arthur walked the city streets, a ghost in his own life, his tailored suit feeling like a costume. He called shelters, his voice cracking with an unfamiliar desperation. The cold dread that settled in his stomach was an old and hated companion, the same feeling that had gripped him in the operating room all those years ago. He wasn't just searching for Sam, he was running from the spectre of his own past, terrified that he had once again broken something precious and irreplaceable. A desperate, instinctual pull finally led him back to the place where their story had begun. It was late, and the rain had given way to a brittle, windless cold that seemed to amplify the city's lonely hum. There, under the faint yellow glow of a street lamp, huddled beneath the same worn awning, was Sam. He looked smaller, as if the world had physically compressed him back into his old shape. He wasn't sorting through refuse or reading. He was just sitting, staring at the relentless flow of traffic with eyes that held nothing. The sight was a punch to Arthur's gut, a visceral confirmation of his failure. He had taken this man, filled him with an impossible hope, and then watched as the world inevitably crushed it. Arthur approached slowly, the sound of his expensive shoes on the pavement feeling like an obscenity in the profound silence of Sam's defeat. He didn't stand over him. He didn't offer a hand or a word of hollow encouragement. Instead, Arthur Caldwell, the esteemed dean of medicine, lowered himself down onto the cold, gritty concrete of the curb and sat beside Sam. The barrier between their two worlds dissolved in that simple act. For a long moment, they just sat there, two men watching the city that had broken them in different ways. Then Arthur began to speak, his voice low and raspy, not as a mentor, but as a penitent. He spoke of a young girl with trusting eyes, of a routine surgery, and of the horrifying, endless silence of a flatlining monitor. He confessed how that single failure had hollowed him out, replacing his passion with a cynical, protective armor. He admitted that helping Sam was never about charity. It was a selfish, desperate attempt to feel something real again. "You were my last hope, Sam," Arthur confessed, his gaze fixed on the distant, blurry lights. "And I saw that fire in your eyes, that hunger for knowledge, and I thought maybe I could warm my own hands on it. I needed you, Sam. More than you ever needed me. You reminded me why I started all of this in the first place. If you quit, then I quit with you." The words hung in the cold air, stripped of all pretense, a raw and vulnerable offering. Sam turned his head slowly, and for the first time, he truly saw the man beside him, not a powerful benefactor, but a fellow soul drowning in his own quiet way. It's in these moments of shared weakness that the strongest bonds are forged, and seeing that connection reminds us why these accounts must be shared. Subscribing ensures more stories of quiet courage can find their way into the light. The silence that followed was no longer empty, but filled with a new, fragile understanding. Sam didn't make a grand declaration or a tearful promise. He simply looked down at the grimy pavement, his mind clicking back into place. He reached out, picked up a discarded, grease-stained fast food wrapper, and flattened it on his knee. With a finger, he began to trace a diagram in the grime. "The counter-current multiplier in the nephron," he said, his voice raspy but clear. "I still don't understand how the vasa recta maintains the medullary gradient without washing it out." He looked up at Arthur, not as a failure seeking absolution, but as a student asking a question. In that moment, on a dirty curb in the heart of the city, the lesson resumed. They were no longer a dean and his project. They were two colleagues, and their fight had just begun again. Their return to the academic fight was quiet, but ferocious, a silent pact forged on a cold city curb. The library became their sanctuary and their battlefield. Gone was the hesitation in Sam's eyes, replaced by a relentless, laser-focused determination. Arthur, in turn, shed the last vestiges of his administrative detachment, becoming a true mentor and advocate. He publicly defended Sam against faculty whispers and privately spent countless hours with him, debating the intricacies of cellular respiration over lukewarm coffee at 3 in the morning. They were a strange and inseparable pair, the weathered man who had learned physiology from discarded books, and the esteemed dean who was relearning his own purpose from him. The day the medical school acceptance letters were posted online, they checked the results together in Arthur's office. Sam's name was on the list. There were no cheers, only a profound, shared silence and a single handshake that conveyed everything. Years later, the cavernous auditorium was filled with the proud families of the graduating class. Dr. Samuel Miller walked across the stage, the heavy doctoral robes feeling less like a costume and more like a second skin he had earned through fire. His gaze swept over the crowd, past the sea of smiling faces, until it found Arthur Caldwell sitting in the third row. The former dean was no longer a man encased in cynicism. His eyes were bright, and the lines on his face seemed to have softened into a map of contentment. He gave a small, proud nod, not as a benefactor to his project, but as one colleague to another. In that moment, Sam wasn't just accepting a diploma. He was validating a journey that had saved 2 lives, proving that the distance from a Fifth Avenue gutter to this hallowed stage wasn't a measure of miles, but of courage and connection. Instead of pursuing a lucrative career in a polished hospital, Dr. Miller took a different path. Using a substantial $500,000 seed fund provided by Arthur, he established the Second Chance Foundation. Its crown jewel was a state-of-the-art mobile clinic, a bus retrofitted with examination rooms and medical supplies, designed to bring compassionate, quality healthcare directly to the city's homeless population. The side of the bus was simply painted with its mission, dignity through medicine. Arthur, now retired from his deanship, was its most dedicated volunteer, dressed in a simple polo shirt and slacks. He spent his days taking blood pressures and listening to patients' stories, his hands finally doing the work his heart had yearned for. He had found his way back to healing, not in a sterile operating room, but on the very streets where his own redemption had begun. 5 years later, the mobile clinic was parked in its usual spot, just down the block from the awning where it all started. Inside, Dr. Sam Miller was patiently guiding a young medical student through a diagnosis. He glanced out the window and saw a teenage girl huddled under the awning, utterly absorbed in a tattered paperback she had pulled from a nearby trash can. Sam smiled, a gentle, knowing expression on his face. He stepped off the bus, walked over, and simply asked what she was reading. The cycle was beginning again. A life is not a thing to be thrown away, and a mind is a fire that should never be allowed to go out. Sharing these truths is the reason we exist, and your subscription is the fuel that keeps these stories of hope on the road.